why don't we get started with an introduction, and then I'm sure that more people will join once you start the presentation. So welcome everyone to this masterclass. It's exciting to see how many people have signed up and shared the event and are joining in today. Today we have a great masterclass with Carlos and Hap from the Three Amigos. A quick update is that unfortunately Paul will not be joining us due to work-related events, but he has been a big part of creating the presentation. So still a huge thanks to Paul for being part of this. And I am sure and certain that Hap and Carlos will do an amazing job. So we are all looking forward to it. But before that, I want to introduce Silicon Vikings and myself. My name is Soren, and I am the CEO of Silicon Vikings. And Silicon Vikings is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are a networking and bridging organization between the Nordics and Baltic countries to Silicon Valley in the US. And we work within entrepreneurship, startups, and investors. We help bridge that gap. And part of what we do is events like this, bridging knowledge. And we do different programs like the New Nordics Pitch Competition, as some of you might know. We just had the grand finals during Slush in Helsinki recently. And yeah, we do other programs like mentorship program. We had a few hackathons, and then we do other cool networking events where we bring entrepreneurs together. So, and part of that is that we are a nonprofit and we do heavily rely on sponsorships as well as donors. So as you can see up in my left-hand corner, it must be, you see a small donation sign. And what we have today is we have a sponsor that is matching donations up to $1,000, and that is a huge amount of money for a small and lean organization like ours. So please consider donating a few dollars, and we will make double that amount. Today's sponsor is Berkshire Hathaway LLP, which is a law firm in the US with a combined experience of 50 years counseling cross-border transactions. They have negotiated more than 250 M&A transactions on behalf of buyers, sellers in technology, life science, manufacturing, and other industries. They are especially great for international growth startups and scale-ups. So please, if you are looking for a good lawyer in the US for your startup or your business, check them out. And they are helping us making these events a possibility. So thank you very much to our sponsor, Berkshire Hathaway LLP. And now for, I think, what you've all been waiting for, the Three Amigos, which is now Two Amigos, but real quick, we have Hap and Carlos who are ready for a great presentation. I saw the slides earlier and they look amazing. If you have any questions during the event, please add them to the Q&A, and we will have a bonus Q&A after the 1 hour mark. And then I will moderate the different questions. And if you have to leave on that mark and you're like, okay, I still want to have my questions answered, this is recorded and you can follow up on your question later on in the recordings. So please ask all the questions you have. And I will ask Hap and Carlos to do a short introduction on the Three Amigos, because they are doing a lot of great content. They are doing a lot of amazing stuff. So without further ado, Hap and Carlos, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Soren. Carlos is going to manage the slides on our behalf. Today, what we're doing is an hour presentation between the two of us. As Soren mentioned, our third amigo, Paul Campbell's not able to join us today. He runs an innovation lab, and as we all do, we have outside practitioner work that we do to keep us really relevant and on top of what's going. And that is part of why we think what we teach is something different. We have created a series of masterclasses, of which this is one that we add in. The umbrella is called, the skills you don't get with a $200,000 MBA. And that's partly about the idea that there's a lot of practical knowledge that you need to add into that system. This would be the 13th. We've done 12 before. On the 19th, we're doing another one, which you're all welcome to join. Go to our website and you'll see how to do that. That topic there is products die fast and brands live longer. But what we're focused on today is the future of entrepreneurial ecosystems, particularly with the impact of what Gen Z is going to do, because it's actually changing the playing field and creating great opportunities for the next great ecosystem beside Silicon Valley. We're all located in Silicon Valley. Carlos, Paul, and myself. When we do these presentations, we try to interact with you so you can help. You can go to our website and contact us. At the end, we will show you the addresses and also put a QR code up so you can do that. My background individually is, I'm probably best noted for, after I received my Stanford MBA, I started a company called the North Face. I ran that for 20 years. I sold that company, have set up and have run a consulting company subsequent to that time. I serve on some boards of companies, one in Chile that's involved in making mycelium, which is mushroom, into a leather substitute. Another one out of Dubai, which is a global democratized healthcare program working with genetic testing and IV drip therapy. We work on a variety of things. I'm an author of a couple books. And then we have a podcast and a newsletter that we come out, plus this series. I do a lot of keynote speaking as well. But where we think that we differentiate from a lot of academicians is we have practical knowledge as well as the academic knowledge that we've developed over time. Paul has geography being in Europe. He's worked with Philips. He's worked with Schneider. He also is working with the Innovation Lab. My background is very entrepreneurial, brand focus. We've all worked globally, but my focus has been in North America. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Carlos.
Yeah, thank you, Hap, and thank you, Soren, for the invitation. My name is Carlos Baradelo. We have been teaching together now for over 10 years with Paul and Hap. And in fact, Soren was a student in one of our classes at Holt. In addition of teaching at Holt and at Berkeley, I am a co-founder of a venture capital, which invests mostly in Latin American startups that have global ambition. As Hap mentioned, we combine the academic work with the practical experience. I was trained as an engineer. I got a PhD from Carnegie Mellon. Before that, I got my master not far away from where you are in Northern Europe, in Eindhoven at the Technical University. And before that, I got my engineer degree from the university in Argentina. I have worked in telecommunications in the East Coast and in Europe in the first part of my career. And the second part of my career, I moved to the West Coast, where we have been based now for about 20 years. So very happy to be here. As we have also mentioned, I sit in the board of a number of startups. And in addition, I consult for the Gallo family business, the largest winemaker in the world. So back to you, Hap, with the presentation.
As we said, we work with a lot of companies. You can see that the work and the organization we've been involved with, some of them are shown here, but we've worked on 4 continents, over 100 plus companies, all quite practical that we're doing. It's giving us the experience that we're trying to share with you at this time. The overleading thing that I'd like to say to everybody is when we talk about our background and what we're doing, everybody looks to Silicon Valley. That's where we're located. And so, we have to replicate that because that's such a great fertile ground. And it definitely is. 1/3 of all the unicorns in the world are located in a 35-mile radius. On top of that, it's created great wealth for a number of companies, individuals, and venture investors, angel investors. But the reality is, we don't believe that if you're going to develop an ecosystem, let's say in Scandinavia or the Baltics, that you should replicate what the business that's out there right now. Really, Silicon Valley has a unique history, a unique culture, some geographical factors that make it stand out. It was founded by people, this area, people coming for gold in 1840s. They were risk takers, and that background still exists today. There was the fortuitous development by Shockley of chips. At the time, the market was named, and he created the boom that existed out there. It's great that happens, but the ecosystem that we think others should develop should be one that capitalizes on the advantages that they have from a cultural standpoint, from a geographic standpoint, and from a timing standpoint, like looking at the evolutions coming with Gen Z. What we're going to cover today is seen on the screen. We're going to start out with the elements of a vibrant innovation and entrepreneurial system. We're going to talk about the vectors that are driving that. We're going to talk about the global startup revolution that's happening right now, try to identify some of the advantages and the opportunities for Scandinavia and the Baltics. Then we'll talk about what we see as plausible future scenarios for the ecosystem, the environmental system, taking advantage of the demographic shifts that are happening to Gen Z. And we'll have some closing thoughts as we go forward. There are 4 or 5 points that I'll highlight now, and then we're going to cover them later as we go through it. But basically, our theory, what we believe is what you need to take is the best practices that exist in Silicon Valley and apply them. And it's entrepreneurship on steroids, if you look at it. This slide highlights the fact that there's a lot of reasons why individuals start business, and it's not just to earn a lot of money. You see that to use their skills and their abilities to affect their ideas, to build for their family, they like the challenge, they like where they live and how they live. All of those things factor into it. And so you don't have to just come to Silicon Valley to be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs exist across the world. And it's more, instead of a stage of a business, it's more of a style of business that you're dealing with. The key factors that we think go into being an entrepreneur that you should apply no matter where you are, the best practices that you can transport from Silicon Valley, practices as opposed to the actual business format that exists here. The first one is building strong networks. We'll talk about that, networks of entrepreneurs, investors, mentors, stakeholders. This organization, Silicon Vikings, is a good example of that. In Silicon Valley, you have a networking event almost every single night. It's critical when you develop that. We also believe you have to support talent development. That means you've got to provide education. Universities are critical, and you have to develop that. There has to be constant reskilling because the pace of change in society is increasing. Everybody in the Bay Area right now is looking at having 12 jobs during their career. Not just 1, not 2, but 12. Obviously, the third one, you have to have access to funding, and that comes from government and individuals and angels. Like a supportive regulatory system and environment to be able to develop it. You have to have partnerships between universities, government, and business itself. It isn't just an individual going off. You have to look at the unique advantages that you have in your area based on your regional strengths and your resources, and you leverage those to be able to be different. And then ultimately, what you have to have is a culture in the geography, a culture in the country about risk-taking. We advocate, and I'm a great believer in the fact that what sets Silicon Valley apart from almost any place else is it's okay to fail in Silicon Valley if you learn from it. It's called failing forward. And in doing that, it allows people to set really outsized goals, because if it's okay to fail, then you can say, I'm going to create a unicorn. And if you fall short of it, you start over again. In Silicon Valley, you're eminently employable. In a lot of other geographies, that doesn't happen. So what you need to do is create that environment, understand that there should be constant experimentation. With that comes some failure, certainly comes some learning that makes you more valuable. So let's move on. Carlos, if you could, Let's talk about the elements of the innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yes, thank you, Hap. Just picking up in what you said, when we look at this chart, we can see that at the center, the main actor of an ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship is the entrepreneur. Is the individual that is going to have and combine a set of attitudes, abilities, and aspirations, the so-called 3 A's, which are essential to mobilize, to energize, to feed the passion to create something new. And there is this culture of trial and error. Go and hit, out of the box. Go for a big idea, something that have not been tried before. And to fail, as I have mentioned, is okay. It's not really failing, it's really learning about what is possible and what is not possible. And at the same time, you have a set of actors that they are all supporting the entrepreneur who is at the center. And there are multiple organizations. And oftentimes, the government thinks that is the most important actor, or sometimes the universities, the education system think that they are vital. And sometimes the financial sector, the investor, the angels, and the VC think that they are the primary mover and shaker. But the truth is that all of these are centered around supporting the entrepreneur. And what you have is indeed that in an innovation and an entrepreneurial ecosystem, you have many players and many roles are required, and each one should have the right incentives. Often money, the economic reward, which is one of the incentives, sometimes is the creation of social value. Sometimes the fact that economic development happens in that region. At the same time, we need to recognize that innovation is not a linear process. It's like a recipe that you put a ton of ingredients and you hope that something wonderful come up. But it's very important to remind ourselves that the role of the government is of a catalytic element. It facilitates, enables the reaction to take place, but it's not really a part of the reaction. And they have incentives that they can shape the markets. Currently we see incentive for renewables, we see incentive for climate, and so forth. And these incentives are focused and target to the ecosystem, but we have to be sure to distinguish between incentives and subsidies. And subsidies in general, they have a perverse impact because they don't create and stimulate the type of behavior that you're seeking. Now, what we see that happens is that there is a number of organizations which are the stakeholders of this ecosystem, and these organizations are there to serve the entrepreneurial, the individual level actions. And these individual level actions, what they do is they do the resource allocation to the creation of new ventures. So between the stakeholders organization, what you see is that they are socioeconomical type of organization, that they need to be sustainable, they need to be scalable, they are interdependent. So the university depends on the government, depends on the financial sector, the corporation depends on other actors. They are dynamics and complex, and they are self-organized. Oftentimes we have visitors that come to Silicon Valley and said, where is the control room where Arnold Schwarzenegger is managing the levers? And it's not. It's totally self-organizing. And it is centered into the main actor, which is the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur is given the responsibility to do the resource allocation for the creation, the operation, the scaling, the global scaling, the global exponential scaling of new ventures. Now, to have a successful ecosystem, you have a number of factors. And as I show in the screen, there are 6 main factors. One have to do with the performance of the ecosystem, the amount of money, the funding, what is the market reach, the talent, the human capital available, and the knowledge economy surrounded it. And also very important, how well connected is that to the rest of the society, to the rest of the country, to the rest of the world. So we're going to take one by one, and let's start with one that is actually quite important, which is funding. Because remember, the entrepreneur, which is the main actor, the main character, is not investing his own money. You know, maybe a little bit at the beginning, but the main contribution that the entrepreneur does and the founding team is her own time. They are going to invest the human capital and the next few years, several years of their life, to give it all for the creation of this enterprise. But they need investors. And the investors, the quality of as I said, is one of the success factors, is the amount of money available and the growth. The next one is the investor quantity and quality. You know, how many angels, how many VCs do you have? And what is the quality of this investor? How savvy they are? How much time they have, how much experience they have invested? And the activity intensity and performance. Because they invest money, this is not a charity. They're investing money to make money. And they don't measure the reward, the financial reward, by 5%. They are looking multiples of 5, of 10, of 20. Because if you want 5% return, you have a banking institution, a banking system that can give you that kind of reward with tremendous safety. You're going to get your money back. Here is a very high risk, very high reward. So the investor need to return to the contributors to the fund that type of reward, of financial reward. So again, here you have the intensity and the performance in the number of exit, the percent of new investors coming, the amount of new money coming, and of course, the exit is the time that money is made for everybody who invested. In terms of performance, we are measuring the quantity and the quality of the exits. And you know, the exit often is not something that we talk very often, but it's absolutely vital. So there is more money coming into the system. The ecosystem value is the sum of all the startups at the last valuation. And the startup success, you can measure it financially, because if you take as a benchmark the valuation of the Series A, then you go the next series, and it's written N there, where it's B, C, or eventually the price of the M&A, if it is an exit by acquisition or IPO, you can see the creation of the multiple by the ratio of the valuation at the last round versus the Series A. Hap, why don't you tell us about the importance of the market reach as a success factor of the ecosystem?
But it's absolutely critical to look at the global market as you're out there, particularly when you look at the Scandinavians and Baltics. The population, as we'll show you later, is small compared to the rest of the world. But if you're global, and in today's world, with all the connectiveness that you have because of the digital world, there's no reason that any company should be anything but global from the first day that they're out there. By being able to reach out to that, you can scale your business on a great level. You may use human capital that actually exists outside of your area because it can be connected. And we've learned during COVID, people work online as efficiently as they do in an office. And it's something to be able to capitalize on. There's an old analogy that you have in terms of hockey. They say, don't shoot the puck to where somebody is, send it to where they're going. And that's where you really want to go right now. You want to look at the opportunities. And Gen Z, as we're going to show you, is coming up. Gen Z is changing the entire landscape and creating opportunities in doing it. The Gen Zers have a different attitude, they have different beliefs, they have different outlooks, they have different desires. And so instead of looking at PIPs and digital that exist, you can do that, but you need to look at the additional markets that are out there that are operating in another way. Carlos?
Excellent. Other element of success is important, the human capital. So how do you measure the human capital success of an ecosystem? I mean, one is the number of universities. And here you have quantity and quality. In fact, how many top universities, like here in the Bay Area, we have Berkeley, we have Stanford, but then we have a number of universities that also play a significant role, that maybe don't have the brand recognition, but is very important for the creation and training of a lot of talent that is required. Also, the formation of talent in the hard science, whether it's math, whether it's physics, biology, finance, that's absolutely important. The compensation is also important because while oftentimes the salaries are very high, can you get labor at a competitive price? And here again, we're going to see, in particular with Gen Zers, the interplay between hiring locally and hiring remote. Also, another element important for the human capital is the startup experience, but even more important, the scaling experience. Because remember, we create companies to grow exponentially. And then the fact that you have successful role model in society. Whether you meet, a successful, pick any one of the founders of the successful companies that you use their services every day, and you bump into them into Starbucks or in the shopping or in a meeting, in a conference, and they are available there to talk to you. And you can say, I can be exactly or better than him or her. The diversity index is also very important, as you know, a matter of innovation, quality and quantity is the diversity index. The fact that you bring people together with all kinds of experience because they have different problem-solving approaches that they bring. And the English level proficiency, and the list goes on. It's very important because the language of innovation entrepreneurship is English. The other element is the knowledge. Is this a true knowledge economy? And the knowledge economy, there are a number of indicators that you can measure in terms of output, volume, impact, dollars or euros invested, the number of centers or multinationals which are present, how many companies have an organization present in the case of Silicon Valley. And the other one is how connected you are. And in connected is because ideas circulate. So this is trying to measure, the networking. How easy is to network? How many events you have, whether they are in a room, present in a room, or virtual or hybrid. How well the different stakeholders are connected globally. Because now the VCs are connected globally, the university, the government, they have free trade agreements that connect them globally. What is your passport strength? Because clearly some countries are in very challenged. They need visa almost to every country, the visa, and the visas take time to get, and they expire 90 days later. So I have observed entrepreneurs from emerging countries in particular, that by the time that they get all the visas, the first one already expired. How easy it is to get a visa when you go and you want, as an entrepreneur, to stay. The number of co-working, the number of accelerators. So all those things are important and what we call the success factor of the ecosystem. But some of you may think, is this sufficient? And the answer is no. It's not sufficient because you need some additional characteristic which have to be done at the country level. One of the controversial issues when you talk to a European audience is the flexible labor laws. Hire at will and fire at will. But that's in fact extremely important for a young company that is going to make hiring mistakes. And you cannot have a tremendous liability as you carry forward and you recognize that you have made a hiring mistake. You need to have a favorable tax treatment for the profits made by the investor, but also by the entrepreneurs that are making money out of the shares of the company in the form of a stock option. They have to be treated in a way that create an economic incentive. In addition, you can look at the list. You have to have very flexible and lenient bankruptcy laws because most of the startups do fail. Over 80% do fail in the first 2 years. And you have to have a society able to take a technology and take risks and adopt new products or new services. You need to have a low regulatory threshold where there is a culture, in particular from the government perspective, that the speeding tickets are fine. You know, you cannot stop a company because they got a speeding violation. And I'm using a speeding ticket as a metaphor because they are taking shortcuts or trying to get it because it's a race against running out of money. So it's a number of country factors which are very important to really support this ecosystem. And here you have one of the rankings. There are many rankings like this. This is one of particular interest. There are others in the presentations that you will see when you get the copy. But here is one from a startup Blink, where it shows, you know, the United States, United Kingdom, Israel, Canada, Sweden being the first appearance of the Nordic countries in this ranking. So, Hap, why don't you tell us what the vectors are that drive the creation of these ecosystems?
Thanks, Carlos. I'll quickly go through those, but as I was saying earlier, you don't want to go where the existing market is. You want to go where the future market's going to be. And the vectors that are changing things are the ones that are going to tell you where those opportunities are. And we really see those in 3 different areas. The first one is about the globalization trends, the social and political things. If you can shift around the world and look at it, that's where the opportunities are going to be. There's all sorts of changes in terms of the numbers and the types of people in the marketplace. We'll go into the Gen Z, which is the biggest impact coming out there. Those are people who basically from 81 to 96 were born. Those are millennials. Probably Gen Z is probably 95 to 2012. As I said, they have entirely different characteristics of what they're looking for, their attitudes and their beliefs. Strong believers in ESG, strong believers in the future business. They will put their ideas, their jobs, their opportunities in those areas. And so you look for what the coming trend is in terms of the socioeconomic and political structure. And then you need to look at the technology trends. AI, major thing. Quantum computing coming up, incredibly big. Green technologies, environmental, robots, autonomous systems. All of those are going to create the opportunities of the future, and they can be applied to virtually anything that you're looking for. And then the demographic trends, of course, as I said, looking at the age groups that exist out there. Carlos is going to show you some slides in a moment to show you there's huge shifts going on. They're out there. One, they're changed by the fertility rate. Some of the countries are not having replacement populations. That's the old and the established countries that exist. The new, the growing ones, like in Africa, if you look at it, looking at India to see what's there, fertility rate is very high and they're growing dramatically. So some countries, some regions are actually going back in terms of numbers of things. There's a shift to urbanization and the type of things that come from urbanization. So the 3 vectors are the globalization trends, the technology trends, and the demographic trends. Looking for the opportunities, they lie within all of those, but also they're sort of globally interconnected as well. So the best opportunities will combine all 3 of those. Carlos, maybe you can talk about Gen Z as you go in there. People can look at it. I've talked this slide, a little hard to comprehend on a short notice, but it shows the distribution of opportunities that exist out there. There's sort of 3 large blocks. The US is one, This is economically. China is another. Europe is a third that exist out there. But as you grow, as you look at time, as you forecast going forward, what you find is going to be a huge shift in terms of the consuming power and the numbers of people that fall into each of those categories. I said, Carlos, maybe you can talk about Gen Z and their impact. The technology,
Yes.
you will be able to get those slides at any time. We're going to leave them afterwards so you can draw down on them from the Vikings website.
Yeah, thank you, Hap. Let's take a deep dive in the demographic trend, which is also actually very telling and very important, not just because of the orientation of this talk to the Baltics and the Nordic countries, but also in terms of the world that is going to, how it's going to unfold over the next decades. So let's take a quick look at where we have been in terms of demographic, the world population. And it was not long ago, in 1960, the planet had 3 billion people. And over the next 40 years, that bring us to the 2000, the population doubled to 6 billion. The other interesting thing is that it's going to take 38 years, and actually by 2038 is the prediction, to become 9 billion people. Now, if you probably remember that today we are 8 billion people, we just crossed the line this year, and we are going to become 10 billion by 2056. So this is how many people we are going to be sharing the planet. We're sharing the planet today, and we're going to be sharing, increasing by 1 billion in the next 5-6 years, and again, another billion by 2056. Now, using that same type of diagram that indicated and have shown in terms of GDP, you have the top 5 countries in terms of population: India, China, the United States, Indonesia, and Pakistan. When you look into the right, the 5 countries have changed. I mean, India now is at the top, Nigeria second. It's a tremendous decrease of population as a result of the one-child policy in China. And then number 5 will come the US and Pakistan. Now, let's talk about the Gen Z, which is part of this demographic trend. And in the next few slides, we would like to answer the following question: who are they? How many are they? What are their characteristics? Where are they? And some recommendations of Gen Z as an entrepreneur after we have recognized the entrepreneurial mindset. So let's take a deep dive on Gen Z. Here you have the social generations. We are going to concern is all the generations from the late 1800s to today. We're going to concentrate in the top 3. The millennials, which are today are between 27 and 42 years old, and they were born between 1981 and 96. And then this changed every 15 years. We have a new generation group, the Zoomers or the Gen Z, which were today have between 11 and 26 years old, and the Alpha generations, which are between 0 and 13 years. And in fact, Alpha generation will continue for the next couple of years. So there are many Alphas that they have not been born yet. So these are the 3 generations that they are mostly interested in, particular the Gen Zs. When we look at the total global population, and if you look, you have on the left the 3 groups. Now, because the Alpha have not been born yet, and to be accessed the international database of the US Census Bureau, this is the last update of last August, I am shifting all the category by 3 years, so I can get directly the data. So if you look, these ages, these cutoff ages are a little bit older, but so we can match the database. But the numbers are shown here: 8 billion, the total world population, And in each category, you have 1.7 millennials, 1.8 Gen Zs, and 2. And the most important thing is that the numbers in each one of these categories is growing from 21% of the total world population to 25%. Now, if you compare emerging world with the developed world, what you have in the emerging world, of the 8 billion people in the planet, 6.7 are in the emerging world and 1.3 are in the developed world. And when you look at each category, what you see is 21% are millennial, 24 and 27 are alpha in the emerging world. The interesting point to take away from this chart is that you see the opposite phenomena because of the lower fertility rate in the developed world. Because you go from 20% of millennial, which is about the same, but look what happened. There is a decrease in the Gen Zers, it's only 16%, and then the next group is 15%. Now, when you move to the Baltics, are just a representation of the developed world. In fact, you could say that they are doing a little bit better because there are probably some incentives or some other programs to increase the fertility rate. So it have not decreased to 15%, but it's stay almost flat at 17%. Now, the United States and Europe behave, of course, very similarly, with the exception that you see that the flattening, the drop in the United States is much smaller, and that's because there is a very strong phenomena of migration curve, in particular from Latin America, that have a very high fertility rate. Now, if we compare this, the amount of population with each one of the cohort, not to the total country population, but to the cohort, you're going to see that 83% of the millennials live in emerging countries, and 88% of the Gen Z and 90% of the Alpha. So what you have is a tremendous amount of representation of this cohort of, let's say, of Gen Zers. 88% are of all the Gen Zers in the planet are in emerging world regions, where only 12% of the Gen Zers are in the developed world. And these numbers are very important because of the conclusions that we're going to draw in a minute. The representation of the Baltics and the Nordic countries is really insignificant. It's really small in terms of the participation in each one of the cohorts. So I want to summarize this. When you look at the 10 oldest countries versus the 10 youngest countries, oldest population of 65 and above, you have 9 of them are in Europe, plus Japan. And then when you look at the 10 youngest countries, well, let's say pick a number, 15 and under in this case, the 10 of them are in Africa. And it's quite remarkable that Niger have almost a 50% representation of people under 15 years old. So let's draw some conclusion for the Gen Zers. So 23% of the global population are Gen Z, the chart that we just saw. And if we do some prediction, 27% of the workforce by the later part of this decade will be working. You know, it will be 27% of the workforce. In addition, today, they have an influence, directly or indirectly, on 7 trillion on purchasing powers. And as we said, 88% are in the emerging world, where only 12% are in the developed world. And those in the developed world are what we call the most generation, because are the most rationally diverse. We can see it in the United States, in particular in both coasts, that many different ethnic groups are present. The same situation we can see in many European capitals where there is a large diversity of participants in the Gen Zers. There is also, is ethnically diverse, is the most connected, and the most globally mobile. These are key characteristics of the Gen Zers. They're also impacted by many crises. In the years that they have lived, which is a very young population, they have been in many crises, starting in 2001 with the war on terrorism, in 2008, the financial meltdown, the constant regional wars that we see up to today, the climate challenge, the global pandemic, in the US, the opioid crisis. So it has been shaped and impacted by one crisis after the other. But at the same time, they have been shaped by great technological developments, and these technological developments have made them digital natives because they were born not just with a digital computer and the internet, but mobile. They're also, the Gen Z are called the 5 screeners, because a study have shown that they are able to handle 5 different screens at the same time. And another characteristic of a different study, they call it a phagotype. And phagotype means that they combine the physical with the digital experience. And the key word is experience. And therefore, they can handle perfectly a hybrid environment. Where sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's virtual, sometimes it's both, whether where they shop, where they work, where they study, or they will socialize. To finish this, I want to go over the entrepreneurial mindset. Now, what you have in the top is the different characteristics that we have identified for the Gen Zers, in particular, the just enough education. The fact that you go 4 or 5 years to undergrad, and then you go to grad school, and then you go to work, is not the right investment in time and money. The fact that it's mobile on and always on 7/24, those are all characteristics of this. But at the same time, there are some other characteristics in the entrepreneurial mindset. One, they're pragmatic because they have been shaped by crisis, but yet they are extraordinarily young. So they are embodiment of this contradiction. The second is that they have a broad outlook because they handle tremendous amount of different information, of different sources. At the same time, they're able to shift throughout all that amount of information and gather opportunities. They're shaped because they are pragmatic, so they're not particularly loyal to a given technology or to a given organization of tool. They can change rather quickly. They're focused in their own interests, and therefore the creation of a startup is a way that the Gen Z have to set their own rules. And finally, they want to contribute to the environment and to social causes. So the social significant play a significant role when they're making their choices. And many of them have been gamers, or they have been part of different crises that provide a unique outlook about mistakes. And for them, it's natural to say, learn and try again. So I want to finish this section about demographic with the following reflection. I hope everybody knows and remember that today we have 8 billion people in the planet. If you just add 29 years and younger, which is the Alpha and the Gen Zers, is 3.8 billion people. Not quite half, but almost half. But then we know that 90% of this youth, these 3.8, are living in emerging countries. And this 90%, if you do the math, is 43% of the total population. And you could argue that it's 43% that live in emerging country, are therefore young. Yes, we know that it's young because that's the numbers that we pick from the charts, from the database. And because they are in emerging countries, you can generalize, and of course, it's not perfect generalization, that they are poor, low income. But here is the situation, which is unique at this time, that their consumption aspirations are greater than ever. You know, everybody wants an iPhone 15. It doesn't matter where they are in an emerging economy or in a highly developed economy, except that it's over €1,000, an iPhone 15, and therefore, how many weeks or how many months you need to work, the consumption aspirations are higher than ever. So, why don't you tell us about this global startup revolution in this context where you have the three drivers: technology, globalization, and demographic changes?
Thank you, Carlos. I mean, looking at the time, and we're almost at the top of the hour right now. We're going to have to move through some of this a little faster than we had anticipated. But I mean, the first thing to recognize, as I said, is we're looking for the opportunities. When people talk about Silicon Valley, you can see in this map, it's not just one technology. There's office tech, there's biotech, there's transportation tech, and hence it's a very vibrant community. When we look around the globe, what we're seeing is because of these great generational shifts that we're talking about in terms of not only quantities of people, but the location of them and what their desires are, that's where the opportunities arise. And if you go to the next slide, Carlos, you'll see that already hubs are developing around the world. You can see that you have certain ones in Asia, you have certain ones in the US, you have two environments, you have Seattle, you have which is one in the US, you have San Francisco, Silicon Valley, you have the East Coast. They all go after different things. If you go to Asia, you start seeing different focuses that are out there. If you want to build a great company, a very large company, it's a different characteristic than if you want to build a small one. Quickly going through this chart, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are just going to develop something locally or nationally. And you can think about it, given the small population you have in Scandinavia and the Baltics. If you want it somewhat larger, you go to a region, perhaps Europe, perhaps beyond Russia, perhaps. As you start wanting to develop the huge and large unicorns they talk about, companies valued at $1 billion privately, you can only do it if you're global. You have to think about hub and spoke. The hub's going to be where that local thing is, whether that's Silicon Valley or whether that's Scandinavia. The spoke is all around the globe, where all of those consumers are, where they're going. And so the mindset has to be globalization. The tool that gets you there is digitization. Also, if you're looking for capital, you have to look for human capital. And where is it available at the appropriate price to be able to move forward? So all of that is global. You can be local, but think global, and that's how you become a unicorn. Carlos, if we can move on to the next slide. Maybe you can highlight.
I'm happy. I really want, this is a very busy chart that shows the amount of VC money and the number of deals in different geographies in the world. And for the benefit of time, I want to compare and contrast two numbers. Two numbers. One that is how much money in 2022 the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley invested, $64 billion, to fund 2,571 startups, 2,571 projects. In Europe, you see that in 2022, the number was somewhat bigger, $81 billion, but they fund 7,564 projects. What that means is that they spread it like butter, very thinly. Because look, for just about, let's roughly say, the same amount of money, they funded 3 times the number of projects. If you go back to compare it to the United States and the world, this amount of money, $64 billion, is 33% of the venture capital of the United States and 16% of the world. So that gives you the significant Silicon Valley in the scale relative to the United States and the rest of the world. The other interesting number is, if you go back to 2021, Europe invested $98 billion, and here you have a case that Silicon Valley invested about $10 billion above Europe. But look at the performance. Of the 1,200 unicorns in the world, 434 are in Silicon Valley, while Europe only have 162 unicorns. So that gives you a sense of relative performance. And some of you are wondering what happened to the Nordic unicorns. And here you have Sweden about 7, Finland 4, Norway 4, Denmark 2, and Estonia 2, according to CB Insight last April. So that tells you that, roughly speaking, if you want to do the math, Norway and Finland have just about between 5 and 6 million people population. So they have about 1 unicorn every million people. Just a fun fact. Pap, back to you.
Right. Well, given the fact we're already past the top of the hour, maybe we need to focus on what are the opportunities that exist outside of Silicon Valley. And the answer is to look at what you have locally. There's good news and bad news when you look at Scandinavia and the Baltics, which this organization obviously looks at. The bad news is the technologies are behind Silicon Valley. But the good news about this is that the future opportunities require the knowledge economy, STEM, and that is where the Scandinavian countries are very strong. The bad news is high taxation does inhibit investors, but as I showed at the outset, entrepreneurs start businesses for a lot of reasons other than just making money. So the taxation really relates more to the concept of, can you attract enough capital? Money is fungible. It can travel all around the world. It's a question if the return, if the exits can be satisfactory. And then the population, Carlos has dwelled on that, but the reality is, look at these numbers, 1.4 billion in China, 340 in the United States, Europe 515, the Scandinavia is only 34 million. As I said, it's going to have to be a hub and spoke to be able to be a huge company. You can think locally, but grow there. As I said, you have the advantage, your strength, certainly in Scandinavia, is some of the most literate companies in the world. You can see 1, 2, 4, 5, and 9. All of the world are the most literate. That is where the opportunities and knowledge are going to come. Healthcare, a great strength because of the investment of the government. I constantly argue, we talk about B2B, we talk about B2C in terms of sales, but we should also think about B2G. That is selling to the government, because the government, with the taxation levels that exist in Scandinavia and the Baltics, has focused their money on a few areas. Healthcare is a great strength of the Scandinavian and Nordic countries. The government efforts are involved in that. The education supports that. The lifestyle is one that's very healthy. The next slide will show you, compared to the United States, the Nordics are way ahead. Scandinavia is way ahead of the United States. Nurses are, if you look at it, 1st versus 3 for the United States. Physicians, the US is ranked 7th. Population covered by public health insurance, only 31% in the US, 100% in Scandinavia. Public and private health insurance, 85% in the US, 100% there. I point this out, and we point this out, not to say that it's the only place to focus, but if you're going to be successful, the way you're going to be successful is look at where you have strengths in the future. Scandinavia and the Baltics are strong in these areas. They're a leader in sustainability, and sustainability is going to be the future. ESG is going to be much more of a driver for the Gen Z than price. Higher education levels, going to be the knowledge economy, that's where we're going. A culture of collaboration, which exists in Scandinavia, is the way you're going to grow, because you cannot have all of the resources inside. Public funding is going to be needed in connective ways. You need strong social welfare systems, which also creates markets. As I said, B to G. You're going to have to improve on progressive government policies with respect to taxation and also support of certain emerging industries. Carlos, I don't know if we have time to go through all of these scenarios because we're already 10 minutes past there, but maybe we could just wrap up. These are where we see the opportunities being. Carlos.
Yeah, Hap, I think you're right. The people will have all the slides to look at the 5 possible scenarios that we have developed. And let's move directly into closing the presentation. And Hap, why don't you pick it up with a quote, our favorite quote for each one of us?
Right. There's 3 quotes that we have, and we think they apply to the entrepreneurial world that exists out there. The first one is one that I think, because you're going to have to take risk. And as I said, the culture in Silicon Valley that makes it different is it's okay to fail. This quote from Thomas Edison is one that I think should underscore the mentality that you have if you're going to be an entrepreneurial ecosystem. He said, I've never failed. I've just found 10,000 ways something doesn't work. When it doesn't work, he said, I'm just closer to the solution. Maybe we go to the next one, which is Paul's favorite one.
No, this is my favorite, Cap. You know, luck favors the prepared mind. You know, the fact to be ready from the mindset to jump into the opportunity with the opportunity pass. And this is Paul's favorite, that say the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. The fact is that we should be able to look into the right place where there is already something that it can give me evidence that opportunity may be real. So let's wrap up with some recommendation for Gen Zers. The fact is, you have to find mentors and coaches and advisors, and you have to take this culture of risk-taking with a small pilot, testing, scale, repeat, and continue performing pilot, because things take time. Then processes, I know that many Gen Z reject bureaucracy, but processes are required. You can run a company, you can become very entrepreneurial, and everybody does the right thing when you have 5, 10 people in the company. When you're 50 or 500, you need to have internal processes and create a discipline. But make sure that those processes represent your values and purpose. At the same time, you don't know everything, so you have to, that's why you have team members that know, hopefully, complementary knowledge or know more about than you know on certain things. You also need to learn how to listen to your investors, to your clients. The other thing is, there are some things which are easy and it will become natural to you. Some others take attention to detail. So you have to have the patience and the energy to take deep dives. And remember, it's not about you. It's about on your customer, it's about your team, it's about your investors. And you will have your fair share of success if you focus in this order, in the customer, the team, and giving a fair return of money to the investors. So again, as part of the closing, 90% of the Gen Zers and the Alpha live in emerging countries. So your future unicorn will be limited if you address just in the developed world. So you have to become global from the beginning. And you need to attract human capital from this 90% pool of people, 3.4 billion people. So this global diversity will set you in the path of to maximize innovation. And finally, there are 6.7 million, which is 84% of the world, that live in emerging countries. And if you can solve one of the problems and at the same time make it financially sustainable, you can do a lot of good and you will do very well for yourself. Cap, back to you for the closing.
Well, to close, and I will summarize the top points without reading all the details, but what we believe to have a very vibrant ecosystem that is going to serve the future, there are 6 points. The first one is you need to have an entire entrepreneurial system, not just entrepreneurs, but you need to connect finance and markets, and you have to be able to deal with the exit challenge of making sure the investors can have a return so they can reinvest. The second thing is you really need to focus on where you have unfair advantages. In Scandinavia, that relates to specialized knowledge about healthcare, about education, about STEM, about circularity and environment and sustainability. You have to think beyond B2B, B2C. You have to think about B2G if you want to look at markets. Look at selling to governments, to military, if that's needed. Next thing is you need to focus on the growing markets, as we've talked about at length. Gen Z, where they're located, how they're located to be able to be out there. But I mentioned before, you have to embrace failure. It is going to be 80% failures with entrepreneur. So you have to create an ecosystem which applauds failure, which does not penalize people for taking a chance and gives them the opportunity to make big dreams about what the future is going to be. And you need to capitalize on the megatrends and the technologies that are coming about. It's going to be digitization, democratization, globalization, things like AI, quantum computing. Focus on those areas, and that's where the growth is going to be. You're not going to be competing with Silicon Valley. We obviously have a lot more content than we're able to provide, but we do need to wrap it up right now. You can contact us at the various things that are located here. We have an upcoming masterclass next week on the 19th about brands, products dying fast, brands living longer. We have a newsletter, which we send out on every Monday that you can do. And of course, you can send us questions at these addresses, or you can send it through Zoom right now. But rather than talk about that, I think we should open it up to a few questions to the people who patiently listed what we're doing. Soren, maybe back to you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for a amazing masterclass. It truly was, and customized to the Nordics as well. So we appreciate that from everyone at Silicon Vikings. We have a few questions. We went a little bit over into the Q&A, but I think we'll manage. And of course, this will be in the recordings as well. Let's start with a quick one. ASG stands for what exactly? You mentioned that earlier in the presentation.
ESG stands for Environment, Sustainability, and Governance. And these are the characteristics that are embraced by Gen Z, but it's talking about taking care of the planet, things like climate change, plastics in the ocean, everything going into landfill. Sustainability is about re-looking at products and services to make sure that they're not just thrown away. Things like fast fashion that exist in apparel, 30% of apparel ends up in landfill because it is not used, recycled, or whatever. And then governance is a big issue where people, indigenous cultures have been exploited, where people are taking advantage of developing countries. No longer is that going to be something embraced by the marketplace. So ESG covers all of those things in different ways. If you can integrate your business into being positive in all those categories, you're going to have the wind at your back.
Wonderful. Another question we have here is, so you mentioned with now that with the Gen Z and the workforce is gonna have to be part of 20 plus companies, 10 plus companies, and so on, that there are going to be many more companies than what has been earlier. How is that going to affect in the future with the Gen Z, the talent attraction and retention? And who's going to win that? Is it going to be the Googles of the world who's going to end up winning the talent, retention, and attraction?
You know, retaining talent is a challenge. It has historically been a challenge. Today, because the mobility of the younger generation, and they're mobile virtually and physically and globally, they travel, you have to be sure that the way to retain them is to capture the imagination and to align values and to align interests. I don't think that you can keep a workforce in a way that you can retain it just because management order. In fact, they will rebel against it, or because of cultural norms. You know, it was in the prior century, it was the norm that it was not looked positively if somebody changed job every 2 or 3 years. Today, that culture have changed. You know, it was not unusual for somebody to retire in the same company that joined immediately after the university. You know, today people will look at you and say, what's wrong with you that you have been, 10, 20, 30 years with the same company? The expectation and the norm is that people will rotate jobs, which have many positive things in terms of education. Now, going back to the question, you will retain the people if you make the job constantly and you renew it to make it relevant, that they are constantly aligned with the values and they feel that they are contributing to something that makes sense. And of course, is financially rewarded.
Okay, interesting. We have another question from before, actually, for our form. So let's see. We have one here saying, how might the values and priorities of Gen Z entrepreneurs differ from the previous generations? You did touch upon it a little bit, but maybe you can elaborate.
Yes, I can take that. I think what's different from the Gen Zers is to manage a huge amount of information. You know, the fact that we call it 5 screeners, the fact that they can have 5 screens simultaneously open and look at the information. You know, sometimes the criticism is that they make judgments based on a headline because that's all what they can see on the 5 different screens. But at the same time, what they make it different is the flexibility to grab different concepts, and sometimes they get it wrong. And when they get it wrong, they learn and they go back and they improve. And I would say that intellectual flexibility is a key characteristic. The other thing that they have been is they are particularly adept to deal with mistakes because they have been shaped by so many crises in their childhood. You know, from birth, they have been affected by one crisis after the other, whether it was 9/11 and then the economic meltdown, and then the constant regional wars and the climate and so forth, one thing after the other. So they have this keen ability to recognize mistakes and to be very pragmatic about it and move on. Hap, I don't know if you have something else to add to what distinguishes the Gen Zers.
I'll just add one specific thing because it's in consumer goods, which I know pretty well because of my background, and that goes to the point of ESG. For the last 3-4 decades, the primary driver in consumer goods has been price. Offshoring to where things can be produced at inexpensive price, channels of selling, things like Amazon, where people do price comparison. And that's been the primary driver. Well, the reality is costs are going up in all of those low-cost countries like China or India. So it's not any longer as easy to produce at a low cost. Also, when the all-up costs have been shown of what's happening in terms of what's happening to the environment, what happens to the carbon footprint when you ship things around the globe, what happens to the cultures that are being exploited, what happens when you're using like chromium for leather and you're fouling the water, when everybody is seeing the all-up cost of that, which is now available because of the transparency created by the computers that exist out there, the consumers are seeing the all-up cost, and the Gen Z people are saying, we want something different. They have the ability because of those tools to see, and they're changing. And so what I would forecast for consumer goods is the next 20 or 30 years, the driver is not going to be price. The driver is going to be the environmental and social responsibilities of the companies that exist out there, which is a great opportunity, again, for the Scandinavian countries that have focused on lifestyle have focused on working in harmony with the earth because they're already positioned to exploit this obvious trend that we see for the future.
Very good. Great answers. And I want to invite more people to ask in the chat. Do we have another one here? The three amigos have talked about the fail and try attitude, prevalent in Silicon Valley, but being European, Danish. I know that culture is smaller here. So what advice do you have to create that environment around your startup in Scandinavia?
Well, I would say the first thing is you need to spread the stories of why some of the cultures have really thrived, like Silicon Valley, and not say, it's there because the first computer was there, Shockley was there, he created chips, because that's the simple thing, but it's not showing what the real benefits, the things that we were highlighting today, why those cultures grew. The more you can spread those stories, the more people realize it's okay. And the concept of failure, I've run companies in New Zealand and in Scotland, and I've been involved in Norway in a company, and I can tell you the concept of failure is not one that's embraced in any of those areas. People shy away from it. Well, if you don't take chances, then the way you do it is by being very modest in your expectation. If you believe it's okay to fail, you can set outsized goals. You can say, I want to be a unicorn, whether that's coming from Denmark or whether that's coming from the Baltics or whether that's coming from somewhere else. And if you fail, you go back and develop your next unicorn or your next business. So one, spreading the information about what the real causes of success are that transcend the actual products. That's one. I think the second thing is recognizing all markets today are global. A company is born global in terms of the markets they're going to, of the talent that they're going to use. The moment that they put their first website online, all the competition sees what they are. So a company has to recognize they're global, that what I called a hub and spoke. You have to think of it that way. Don't think of your market being the region in Denmark alone, or the region in Scandinavia or the Baltics alone. You have to think of how you market, sell, and distribute to various parts of the world.
I think storytelling is an important part of a culture change. I think the fact that to know and learn about different success and fail stories, opportunity missed, and people that failed, but eventually somebody benefit from all the knowledge of the failure to make a win. I think all those things are part of the conversation that in Denmark or any other country need to engage, and eventually have to change the culture, because it's a culture change in society, but also government rules. In many countries, bankruptcy law are very harsh because there is the presumption of wrongdoing. If the company went under, it's because maybe the executive did something wrong. Okay? Why not to think, look, they tried every possible thing, and they were so ambitious in their plan, and the technology was not ready, and maybe the market was not ready to buy those products, and that's why they failed. But that doesn't mean that it's a failure. I mean, a lot of people try electric car until Tesla came and was a success. Okay? And a number of companies tried to do search engines until Google came and it was a big hit. But some of you may remember of Alta Vista or Yahoo or some other search engine. So can we get the conversation going with the different stakeholders to really embrace a culture that failing is not really failing, it's learning about possibilities? Back to you, Soren.
Wonderful. We have one here. I work with the alpha generation and find a lot of them are paralyzed by perfectionism. Instead of reacting with flexibility, as you're suggesting, I do see some who are more flexible, but I see many more who are afraid to fail, and that's in the US. Can you speak on this phenomenon? You did speak on it briefly, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about it.
Well, one thing is that there's a lot of myths out there, and particularly when people look at Silicon Valley, they think all you have to do is have a garage, open it up, develop a product, and next day you're a unicorn. Overnight success. Every overnight success takes a while to be able to develop, the patience that Carlos referred to. And so the true stories need to get out there. And the fact is, the true stories about failure in Silicon Valley have not really come out. Most of the people that you think about who were really great leaders in Silicon Valley failed, were kicked out of their first job or second, and ultimately came back. Steve Jobs was kicked out of Apple because he didn't know how to play well with others. They finally brought him back after he'd learned. Mark Andreessen, who started Netscape, he didn't understand the concept that, it doesn't matter how good your patents are. If you don't have the money to support it, you're in trouble. He took on Microsoft to the point where he ran the company, almost Netscape, out of capital. The board said, we can't afford to find Microsoft. And he said, well, Microsoft is wrong. We're going to battle them. They said, well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave. Well, Andreessen now runs the most successful venture firm, or one of the ones in Silicon Valley, called Andreessen Horowitz. Jack Dorsey, he started Twitter. He was not able to, he grew too fast, grew out of the capital. The board said, you have to leave. He left. He started other companies. They actually brought him back into Twitter before Elon Musk came in. I think those stories need to be spread around so that people realize that there is an evolution. There is a way to grow beyond that. People who believe that they're going to have overnight success either look at it and say, well, if I'm already year 2 of my business. If I haven't made it, I better just hunker down and slow up, as opposed to now you're getting product market fit. Now you're getting proof of concept. Now is the time to really double down. And I did see a question in the chat, which is interesting. Where the capital come from? Money is fungible. Money will travel around the world if the return is good. There is an evolution coming in funding, which is important for the Scandinavia and Baltics for sure. And that is family offices are becoming a larger player in terms of investing. Originally, family offices invested as limited partners in many of the venture firms. But what they realized is that maybe the venture firms weren't patient enough. Maybe the venture firms were taking too large a return. So now many of the family offices, while still doing some investment in private equity or doing some investment in venture firms, are doing a lot of investment on their own to be able to go after it. And these are ones that oftentimes are populated by third generations of a family, fourth generation, who are actually part of Gen Z and who are cognizant of what the changes are and believe they follow them. Carlos?
Yeah, I think I would like to go back to the question saying the alpha generation seem to be paralyzed because they seek perfection. And as we know, the quote that we like from Voltaire, perfection is the enemy of what's good. And I would argue that observation comes mostly from the developed world. And the alpha generation in the emerging world doesn't have the option to be perfect because they're fighting day-to-day problems. And the reality of growing up in those conditions, whether it's in Latin America or Africa or the Far East, they ground you in a reality that is much more challenging. So the optionality of perfection doesn't exist. So I think that's a very important reflection in terms of competitive posture of the alpha, or actually any generation, and the ability not to be competitive, but also to associate and to bring, because what we have learned, and the pandemic have had a tremendous role in accelerating the formation of virtual teams working together, where now the team is not just 5 Danish or 3 Danish and 2 Swedish, but now you have somebody from Guatemala, somebody from Korea, somebody from Taiwan, all working together as a team. And that brings an entirely different perspective. Also, because the large population of Z or eventually alpha generation are in the emerging world, and the price performance is much lower to hire somebody in Bolivia or Peru. I mean, Latin America is a region that I know very well. There is a factor of 3 or 5 difference for the same type of skills or very similar type of skills. So if your money reach much farther if you include human capital from emerging world regions where, even if it is significantly smaller, it allows an excellent quality of life for people living in those geographies. Back to you, Soren.
Wonderful answers. We have a lot of questions coming in, and I do want to mention that we are over time, and thank everyone who's still here. We should do a few more questions. Is that okay with the two of you?
Sure.
And then we'll call it a wrap, and then we'll see if we can get to the questions offline and then see if we can get them out to you. Let's see here. So there's a question on what kind of advisory coaching support does a Gen Z entrepreneur need that is different from older generations? Is there a difference in terms of mentoring?
I think, look, coaching is always coaching, is sharing experience. I think the only difference that it is, that at least from my experience, given that I do a lot of coaching and advice to young entrepreneurs, is the ability to listening in terms of how to listen, the way they frame the problem. The problems tend to be similar, okay? But the way they frame the problem is different. And in addition is their attention span. It has been reduced. That's a global phenomenon with every generation. So how do you engage and have impact? It changed. Of me as an advisor, as a coach, that say, okay, how do I listen to them? How do I process? And how to provide a small bites of information that have impact, and they enable a longer conversation. Okay? How do you react to that?
Experience is a big factor, and some of the things that Gen Z are going to face are things that you may not learn in school, probably didn't learn in school, and may not have the experience dealing with. The first one is being a global business. Every business needs to be global, and it is hard when you're dealing with regulations that are different, taxation that's different, issues that are out there. So the advice they need about being a global company, I find, is something that really helps them grow. The second thing is that businesses now scale much more rapidly because it's digital oftentimes, and it's much easier to scale a digital company and much more necessary to scale a digital company than a product company. As a result of that, how you speed up, how you grow a company faster is something where generally people need advice. Where do you find the human capital to be able to put that together? How do you develop teams of people who are global that have different time zones, have different mentality, different approach to business, different, all of those? That's where some advice needs to happen. And then the third advice that I think that people really need to look at is how they can actually exit their investment, because historically most companies were developed, they were going to be kept for generations. I'm going to build it, it's really good, I'm going to pass it on to my son and he'll pass it on to his daughter, and that's how we're going to grow. Now, because of the way the world is, business life is shorter and shorter. So people have to be thinking about an exit. They have to be thinking about mergers and acquisitions. They have to be thinking about IPOs and going to the marketplace. That's a small segment that do that, but that's one approach. And they have to be able to do that. Usually, the people developing the company don't have the context necessary to pull that off. They don't have the experience to be able to do that.
Awesome. Let's finish up with the last question. And have you already touched upon it, but the biggest challenge in the Nordics is there isn't enough capital. How do we improve the venture funding ecosystem in the Nordics? So you did mention that it's a global flow of funding, but as a region or a country, how do you improve your odds of bringing in foreign venture capital or foreign funding?
Well, there is a joke, Soren, that say whether you rob banks, and the answer is, well, that's where the money is, right? So if you don't have, if the money is not coming, it's not available where you are, you need to go where the money is. And we have a chart that shows the different ecosystems. And oftentimes we see Scandinavian companies, Nordic companies coming successfully in Silicon Valley. Okay, obviously it takes a number of skills to come. It's not just to buy a ticket and then in the airport you're going to find VCs willing to give you money. You have to do your homework. But if you do your homework successfully, what you're going to see is your ability to come here. You will probably use the advice of different mentors. You're going to find a law firm. You're going to incorporate the company in the US. You're going to probably have in one of your co-founders that is willing to take the time and the effort to come and live in Silicon Valley, not for days or weeks, but months or years, and maybe establish herself or himself there for a long haul, and start playing by the rules of Silicon Valley. And there is a good chance that it's going to get funding, okay, if they have a value proposition that is worthwhile. I think I want to add one comment. It said the company, and I have mentioned, it has to be born global from day one. That doesn't mean that you don't test the product in your own city and you try to scale within maybe initially in your own country. But if you have that sequence mentality of being sequential, and then you say, well, maybe I'm in Denmark, and then if I'm successful, I move to Sweden or I move to the Netherlands, you will never become a global company. You may be a good lifestyle company. There is nothing wrong. It's terrible for the investor, but there is nothing wrong for the entrepreneur to be a lifestyle company that plays successfully in a region of Northern Europe. Okay, but if you really want to become a unicorn, you have to become global. You have to address a global pain point, and you have to become a really global company.
Two quick comments on that topic, and they're very specific. One is you need to advertise success. Success follows success. Money follows money. There isn't a lot of promotion done about the successful companies in that area. Certainly the Vikings is a way to get that out. But when people realize the successes that are happening, they will find their way to you. Now, the second part of that is a challenge for many of the Scandinavian countries, and that is you have to over promote yourself. Scandinavians tend to be understated. They tend not to be bragging a lot compared to some of the others. Go to Italy, go to the US, go to Silicon Valley, and everybody talks about how great they are. You look at Steve Jobs, you look at Elon Musk, they're the biggest self-promoters in the world. And yet people did that. So you're going to have to stretch a little because you're going to have to do self-promotion to be able to attract that capital. But you do self-promotion around success, legitimate success, and people will find their way there. Once they realize, boy, this is a great market, and frankly, there aren't that many competing with it, it's a great opportunity. When you sit around with venture capitalists at the Rosewood Hotel in the middle of Silicon Valley, one of the major things they argue about is there's too much capital here, all chasing the same deals. We never get a good price. If you start marketing the fact that there's a limited amount of capital and a lot of deals, you're going to see people finding their way to your door.
Wonderful. I think we will leave with that. So on behalf of Silicon Vikings and everyone here, thank you so much for taking the time and preparing this amazing presentation. A lot of comments in the Q&A and in the chat asking for the slides and the presentation. So that will be sent out as the follow-up email. So don't worry, everything will will be sent out. And yeah, thank you so much. And especially thank you for really customizing this to the Nordics as well and the Baltics. So yeah, and thank you for everyone who joined. I know we went over a little bit, but yeah, I'm glad the ones who stayed, you stayed. And for the rest, you'll be able to see the recordings very soon. So thank you so much, Carlos and App, and to Paul, who couldn't be here today.
Thank you, Soren.
So,
it's a pleasure.
Okay,
thank you very
good
much.
to see you again. Bye now.